We discussed in the previous part of our discussion that the political consciousness of tribal communities increased since 1970s due to different kind of factors. And the agitation for the FRA was result of that increasing political consciousness of tribal communities. Many tribal and non-tribal people were termed as encroachers due to lack of evidence to prove their ownership over forest land. And this particular process started in colonial period when, on the basis of the provision of 1878 Forest Act, colonial rulers demanded forest dwelling communities to produce some written proof to show their existence on a particular piece of land. And when they could not produce any kind of written proof, they became encroacher on that land. And since we adopted the revised version of 1878 Forest Act, that is 1927 Forest Act, through our constitution, it led to different kind of processes which were there in that law. And on the basis of this law, that is Forest Act of 1927, we created new kind of forests which resulted in making other tribal people as encroachers. And also due to different kind of development projects, mining projects, tribal people were displaced from one place, and they never resettled properly, resettled to any new place. And when they moved from one place to another place, they became encroacher. So-called encroachment was a big problem for tribal communities. And the eviction of forest dwelling communities in 2002 played an important role for the mobilization of Adivasi organizations for the demand of a law to ensure the rights of tribal communities over forest land. Uh, Understanding the process of the enactment of the FRA is necessary and important because it underlines the attempt of forest dwelling communities to ensure their forest rights over forest land and its resources. It can also be said that through the struggle for this law, these groups claimed the livelihood rights and right to live with dignity. When the bill was introduced in the parliament in 2005, it had following features. And basically in 2004 Lok Sabha election, most of the political parties, national political parties, accepted the demand for a new kind of law to regularize the tribal communities' rights over forest land. And it was resulted in the introduction of a new kind of law in December 2005. So when UPA government was formed, first in April 2005, it released a bill for the discussion in civil society, and then it introduced that bill in December 2005. So when the bill was introduced in the parliament, it had following features. It was only related to the scheduled tribes when it was introduced in the parliament in December 2005. The title of the bill was Scheduled Tribes Recognition of Forest Rights Bill 2005. It mentioned the upper limit of recognized land as 2.5 hectares, and the cutoff date was 24th October 1980. It means that to get regularization on a particular piece of land, any scheduled tribes family had to prove that it had been living on that land before 24th October 1980. The provisions of the customary rights were weak in the first draft of the bill, which was introduced in the parliament. It also mentioned the right to habitat for primitive tribal communities. So after introduction in the parliament, a joint parliamentary committee was constituted to consider the bill due to its controversial nature and the opposition by the conservationists. In fact, when the idea of legislating this kind of law emerged, the conservationists started to oppose it. Their argument was that this kind of law will create a huge problem for the existence of wildlife. So they opposed it. And due to their opposition, when the bill was introduced in the parliament, it was given to a joint parliamentary committee. A joint parliamentary committee was formed, and the members of all political parties were part of this JPC or Joint Parliamentary Committee. Now, the tribal organizations mobilized themselves for ensuring the rights of forest dwelling communities. Due to their pressure, the JPC changed the bill drastically. The JPC submitted its report in May 2006, and finally the act was passed by the parliament in December 2006. Now, before understanding the recommendations of JPC, what we have to understand is that how tribal organizations mobilized tribal communities at the grassroots level in the favor of this act. So at the central level, there was campaign for survival and dignity, and in its banner, different tribal organizations mobilized themselves, and these tribal organizations actually tried to mobilize other grassroots organizations, and all of them tried to create an awareness in the minds of tribal people. They started to send postcards to their Lok Sabha member or legislative assembly member to support this kind of act. And they also submitted memorandums to Joint Parliamentary Committee, which resulted in a situation where the Joint Parliamentary Committee drastically changed the nature or the provisions of the bill which was introduced in the Lok Sabha in December 2005. So we should focus on some crucial changes which were actually included in the JPC report. The first important change was that the bill was only related to scheduled tribes, but apart from STs, now it included OTFDs, that is other traditional forest dwellers, in the purview of the bill. And the title of the bill also changed. Earlier, the title of the bill was Scheduled Tribes and Other Scheduled Tribes Recognition of Forest Rights Bill 2005. Now it became Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Bill 2006. According to the JPC report, the OTFDs had to prove that they had been living on a particular forest land from 3 generations. The JPC increased the limit of recognized land from 2.5 hectares to 4 hectares. It changed cutoff date for STs from 24th October 1980 to 30th December 2005 when the bill was introduced in the parliament. It strengthened the community rights given in the earlier version of the bill. It also introduced the idea of critical wildlife habitat to satisfy conservationists. Critical wildlife habitat would be a forest area where the rights of the local communities can be partially or totally modified if a committee of experts, civil society organization, and local communities would decide that the existence of the human beings would be detrimental to the wildlife. It makes the provision of the relocation of the local communities from the CWH, but for it, the free informed consent of the Gram Sabhas in writing is necessary or would be necessary. The Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act or FRA or Forest Rights Act passed by the Parliament on 19 December 2006 and got assent of President of India on 29 December 2006. It is noteworthy that it accepted most of the recommendations of the JPC but made some changes too. Most important change was the inclusion of condition for the OTFDs to prove that they have been living on a forest land not only from 3 generations but also from 75 years. So it was an important change because later on OTFDs realized that it is really very difficult to prove that they are living on a particular place or on a particular piece of land from 75 years. Okay, but what is important is that though the act was notified on 2nd January 2007, the act came in force from 31st December 2007. So again, the implementation of Act was delayed for 1 year due to the opposition of conservationists. They repeatedly argued that the implementation of this kind of act would create lots of problems for wildlife, and there should be stronger provisions for the protection of wildlife or the protection of the interest of wildlife in this act. However, with the idea of CWH, the act was notified and it came into force from 31st December 2007. The Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Rules 2010, notified in the Gazette of India on 1st January 2008. The rules 2008 further amended and notified in the Gazette on India on 6 September 2012. FRA is a comprehensive law. It applies to all types of forest land, which includes land of any description falling within any forest area, and includes unclassified forests, undemarcated forests, existing or deemed forests, protected forests, reserve forests, sanctuaries, national parks, and tiger reserves. And I just want to give you a list of forest rights given by FRA or Forest Rights Act. One important kind of right given by Forest Rights Act is individual forest rights, which gives the right to self-cultivation, actual occupation or maximum 4 hectares. Second, in or over disputed land, actual occupied area, conversion of pattas or leases on the land where a particular tribal family is doing cultivation. And then it is important to note that FRA is giving a joint ownership over land to both these spouses, that is husband and wife. And in the case of single women, if a woman is single due to any kind of situation, and if she is doing cultivation on a forest land, that her right over that land would be recognized according to the provisions of the Forest Rights Act. Apart from individual rights, it also gives some important community rights. Right over community forest resources, that is, minor forest produces, and then right over habitat, particularly those tribal communities who are backward and who are in the category of primitive tribal communities, they have this right to habitat, and then right over seasonal landscape, and then conversion of forest villages to revenue villages. This is an important point because there are many villages who are situated in forest due to different kind of reasons, and they have been facing different kind of problems due to their existence as forest villages. They have been forced to accept different kind of illegal conditions by forest department. So the FRA makes a provision to change these forest villages into revenue villages. What we have to remember here is that actually FRA gives community rights in the sense of making gram sabhas of a particular village capable of intervening in the process of converting a forest land into revenue land. So it also gives them right to protect forests. So it makes them a stakeholder in the situation of forests. So according to the provision of this law, now forest department cannot say that the areas which are coming under forests are their areas, and villagers or tribal communities or forest dwelling communities have nothing to do with these areas. So it gives them an important right to protect forests too. Now there are different kind of development rights. They can establish a school, dispensary or hospital, Anganwadi centers, fair price shop, electric and telecommunication, tanks and other minor water bodies, drinking water supply. So basically they can do all these things on those lands which are actually they have been using from a long period. But if these lands are on paper indicated as forests, then they can use these lands for their development or developmental rights. Now, if we look before moving towards the implementation experience of the FRA, if we just try to evaluate the FRA on the basis of its different provisions, we can say that it gives certain important rights to forest dwelling communities. The most important aspect of the FRA is that it is for the whole country, and it is not just for the scheduled tribes. It also gives a space uh, or rights to those communities who are dependent on forest land, who have been living on forest land, who have been using forest resources, but they are not part of scheduled tribes. So it creates a new kind of category, that is OTFDs. So basically, OTFD or the creation of OTFD is a very progressive aspect of the Forest Rights Act. And also it gives right to habitat to primitive communities. It gives them right to protect forest land. It gives them right over forest resources. So we can say that Forest Rights Act presents a framework where tribal communities can actually play an important role in the governance of forests. They are now equal partner in the governance of forest resources. But there are, and again, what we have to remember is that it tries to create a balance between the concern of conservationists and the rights of tribal and other forest dwelling communities' rights. Now, it creates the idea of CWH. So it accepts that even in from national parks or from protected areas, tribal communities can be relocated, but it must be proved that their relocation is necessary. It is unavoidable for the existence of wildlife. But there are certain limitations of Forest Rights Act too. For example, I mentioned this thing earlier too, that actually the idea of OTFD and the conditions for OTFD is very difficult. So in JPC report, they had to prove that they have been living on a particular forest land from 3 generations. But now, after the enactment of this law, the provision is that they have to prove that they have been living on a particular forest land from 3 generations and 75 years. So it is a very, difficult condition for any forest dwelling community to prove. Apart from this, we should also remember that though Parliament passed Forest Rights Act, it never discussed the supremacy of this law, because there are many other laws which are equally powerful, which gives power to forest department. For example, Indian Forest Act of 1927, for example, Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. All these laws are giving important powers to forest department, and the Forest Rights Act does not resolve the issue of contradiction between its provision and the provision of other laws. So in this sense, we can say that it also leaves some space for ambiguity. But if we try to evaluate it, we can say that it gives many rights to local communities, scheduled tribes, and other traditional forest dwellers. In the next section, we will try to understand that how this law has been implemented in last 15 to last, we can say 13 years or 14 years. So we'll try to understand its implementation experience in the next section of our presentation.